"Stay tonight," said the Apache woman. The cowboy was speechless. The desert sun was sinking low over the Arizona horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and gold. The heat of the day was finally giving way to the cool, calm evening. A lone cowboy rode slowly along a dusty trail, his horse's hooves crunching softly against the dry earth. The cowboy's clothes were dusty and worn, the edges of his boots scuffed from many miles traveled. He had been riding all day, looking for a place to rest, and the quiet desert around him offered only the sound of the wind through the scrub and the occasional call of a distant bird. He had no real destination in mind. Towns were few and far between in this part of the territory, and he preferred it that way. The life of a cowboy was often lonely, but it gave him freedom. He had learned early that relying on no one but himself was the safest way to survive. Still, the constant solitude sometimes weighed on him. The open land could be beautiful, yes, but it could also feel endless and empty. There was comfort in seeing another human being, even if only for a short while. As the cowboy rounded a bend, he noticed a small creek glinting in the fading sunlight. Water was rare in these parts, and he slowed his horse to a walk, eager to give his tired companion a drink. The horse dipped its head, lapping at the cool water, and the cowboy breathed a little easier. The sound of the water was soothing, almost magical in the silence of the desert. He dismounted, wiping sweat from his brow, and leaned against a rock, letting his eyes roam across the open land. It was then that he saw the fire, small and flickering, just beyond a cluster of rocks and bushes. At first, he thought it might be smoke from a distant camp or a traveler, but as he moved closer, he realized someone was there. Sitting by the fire was a woman. She had dark hair that shone in the firelight and skin kissed by the sun. Her eyes were calm and steady, watching him with curiosity rather than fear. The cowboy stiffened. He had heard stories of encounters with strangers in these lands, both good and bad. His hand instinctively moved closer to his belt, where his revolver rested. The woman did not speak at first. She simply held up a hand in a gentle gesture, as if to show that she meant no harm. The cowboy's heart slowed a little, but he did not relax entirely. He had been alone for so long that he was unsure how to respond to a human presence that was neither hostile nor overtly friendly. There was something in her demeanor, however, that caught his attention. She did not seem afraid, yet she was alert. Her movements were deliberate and careful, showing strength and confidence. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying easily over the gentle crackle of the fire. "Stay tonight," she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. The cowboy was taken aback. He did not expect such a direct offer from a stranger, especially in this harsh and unforgiving land. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. He had traveled far, surviving on his wits and caution, and he was not accustomed to such straightforward kindness. The woman watched him carefully, noting his hesitation. She did not press the matter further, simply waiting for him to make his choice. There was a quiet patience in her, a sense of understanding that spoke louder than words. The cowboy's mind raced. Part of him wanted to decline, to continue on his path without delay. But another part of him, the part that had been lonely for so long, felt a strange pull toward the fire and the calm presence of this woman. He realized that he was tired, not just physically, but in a way that only solitude can make a person tired. He wanted rest, warmth, and perhaps a conversation that did not revolve around work or survival. After a long pause, he finally nodded. It was a small gesture, but it carried a lot of meaning. The woman smiled slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of his decision. She gestured toward a spot near the fire, inviting him to sit. The cowboy approached cautiously, keeping his senses alert while letting himself relax just a little. As he settled near the warmth of the flames, he could feel the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. There was a strange comfort in the firelight. in the steady presence of another human being who did not judge him or ask questions too soon. The night air began to cool, and the desert sounds grew more pronounced. Crickets chirped, the wind rustled through the sparse trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out. The cowboy watched the woman as she moved about her small camp, arranging a few simple items and tending to the fire. Her movements were efficient and deliberate, showing experience and familiarity with the land. She was not just surviving here, she was at home. That realization struck the cowboy. He had been a traveler all his life, moving from place to place, never truly belonging anywhere. And yet, here was someone who lived in harmony with this harsh land, who seemed to thrive in it rather than simply endure it. He found himself curious about her life, about how she came to be here, and about the stories she might tell. But he was cautious. He had learned that people often hid more than they revealed, especially in the frontier. Trust was earned slowly, and he intended to proceed carefully. Still, the quiet presence of the woman and the gentle crackle of the fire made him feel something he had not felt in a long time, a sense of safety, if only temporary, and a flicker of connection to another human soul. Hours passed as they sat in silence, listening to the night and watching the stars appear one by one. The cowboy's thoughts wandered, reflecting on the long road he had traveled, the hardships he had faced, and the moments of beauty he had witnessed along the way. He realized that life on the frontier was often harsh and unforgiving, but it was also full of unexpected encounters, moments of kindness, and opportunities for connection. This night, simple as it was, seemed to hold a quiet promise of something meaningful, a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of the desert, people could find each other and share moments of understanding. Finally, the cowboy spoke, his voice low and rough from disuse in conversation. He asked her about the land, about the fire, about the small things that made life here possible. She answered patiently, sharing stories of survival, of the plants and animals, and of the ways her people had lived in harmony with the desert for generations. He listened intently, realizing that there was more wisdom in her words than he had expected. He was not just hearing about survival, he was hearing about life, about respect for the land, and about the quiet strength it took to endure without losing hope. By the time the moon rose high above the desert, the cowboy felt a subtle shift within himself. The initial tension, the automatic caution, had begun to melt away. He understood in a small but significant way that this encounter was more than chance. It was a moment of learning, of reflection, and perhaps the beginning of a bond that would change him in ways he could not yet see. The woman beside the fire was more than a stranger. She was a teacher, a guide, and a companion for a night that would linger in his memory far longer than the hours it lasted. As he finally settled down to rest by the warmth of the fire, the cowboy felt a sense of gratitude that was foreign to him but welcome. For the first time in many days, he allowed himself to relax completely, trusting that he was safe, if only for this night. Outside, the desert continued its quiet symphony of wind and distant animal calls. But for the cowboy, the world had become smaller, warmer, and a little less lonely. And as he closed his eyes, he remembered the words that had startled him at first, now echoing gently in his mind. "Stay tonight." The night deepened over the desert, wrapping the land in a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred. The cowboy stirred slightly, feeling the warmth of the fire on his face and the cool breeze on his back. He had never spent a night like this before, not in a town, not in a camp, not even on the open range. There was something about the calm, steady presence of the Apache woman that made the desert seem less vast and lonely. He was no longer just a traveler passing through. For the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere, even if only for a few hours. She motioned for him to sit closer, offering a small piece of roasted meat wrapped in leaves. At first, the cowboy hesitated, unsure if he should accept, but hunger eventually won over caution. He took the food, noting the careful way she had prepared it. It was simple, yet nourishing, and the flavors spoke of the land, the herbs, the fire, the subtle smoky taste of the roast. As he ate, she continued to tend the fire, adding small pieces of wood with a graceful ease that came from years of practice. Finally, curiosity got the better of him. "How long have you lived out here?" he asked, his voice low, not wanting to disturb the quiet of the night. "Most of my life," she replied simply. Her tone carried no pride, no boasting. It was a matter-of-fact answer, but the depth behind it was clear. She had seen seasons change, watched the desert bloom and wither, and had learned to live in harmony with it. The cowboy nodded, chewing thoughtfully. He had traveled across many miles of harsh land, but he had never truly lived in one place long enough to understand it fully. His life had always been about moving forward, surviving the next storm, facing the next danger. And yet, here was someone who had lived quietly, deeply, and fully, even in the most difficult of circumstances. It made him pause and reflect on his own life, the choices he had made, and the way he had moved through the world with only himself to rely on. She noticed his thoughtful gaze and smiled slightly. "You carry the weight of many roads," she said. The cowboy looked at her, surprised. Her eyes were steady and kind, but there was an insight in them that made him feel almost exposed. How could she know that? He had spoken no words about his long journeys, his struggles, or the loneliness that came with being a man constantly on the move. "I guess I do," he admitted finally, his voice quiet. "It's been a long road, and sometimes it feels like it never ends." She nodded, understanding in her expression. "The road is never easy," she said softly, "but some paths teach us more than we realize. Even the ones that feel empty or endless can show us who we are." The cowboy listened, absorbing her words. There was wisdom in her voice, a kind of quiet truth that only came from experience. He realized that for the first time in many months, maybe even years, he felt a connection, not just to another person, but to the world around him. The desert was no longer just a backdrop for survival. It was alive, full of lessons and stories if one cared to notice. As the fire crackled, she began to tell him about her life. She spoke of the traditions of her people, the knowledge passed down from her ancestors, and the ways they had learned to live in balance with the land. She described the plants that healed, the animals that provided food and guidance, and the importance of listening to the wind and the earth. The cowboy listened intently, fascinated by the depth of her understanding. He had known the desert only as a challenge to be endured, but she revealed it as a teacher, a companion, and a friend. In return, he shared parts of his own life, though cautiously. He told her about the towns he had passed, the cattle he had driven, and the long days spent riding under the sun. He spoke of storms that had tested him, of nights alone under the stars, and of the small victories that kept him going. At first, his stories were brief, almost guarded, but her attentive presence encouraged him to open up more. He realized that this conversation, this sharing, was different from the conversations he had with strangers in taverns or fellow cowboys. Here there was no judgment, no expectation, only listening and understanding. Hours passed in this quiet exchange, the fire casting long, dancing shadows across their faces. They laughed softly at small memories and moments of humor, and they fell silent at times, letting the desert speak for them. The cowboy began to notice the small details of her world, the way she moved with ease, the careful way she treated every item around her, and the calm patience that seemed to flow from her naturally. It was a stark contrast to his own hurried, sometimes careless way of moving through life. The night grew colder, and the cowboy pulled his coat tighter around himself. She offered him a blanket, which he accepted with gratitude. They sat closer to the fire, the warmth of the flames and the blanket wrapping him in a rare comfort. It was strange, he thought, how quickly a sense of safety could grow, even with someone he had just met. He realized that trust was not given lightly in his life, but sometimes it could be felt in a single gesture, a single night shared under the stars. As the hours passed, the conversation turned deeper. She asked him about his dreams, about the moments that had shaped him, and about the hopes he still carried despite the hardships of his life. He found himself reflecting in ways he had not done for years. The frontier life had taught him to suppress feelings, to focus on survival and work, but now he was reminded that there was more to life than enduring. There was understanding, connection, and the quiet joy of being seen and heard. He, in turn, asked her about her hopes and fears, her experiences growing up among her people, and the challenges she faced in a world that often did not understand or respect her way of life. She answered honestly, without complaint, yet with a clarity that revealed both strength and vulnerability. He admired her courage, the way she carried herself with dignity and wisdom despite the difficulties she had faced. In many ways, she reminded him that strength was not just about physical skill or endurance, but about understanding, patience, and resilience. By the time the moon reached its highest point, the cowboy felt a profound shift within himself. The desert no longer seemed empty. It was alive with stories, lessons, and quiet beauty. The night, once just a passage of time, had become a meaningful experience, filled with learning, reflection, and connection. He had come to the creek tired and weary, expecting nothing, and yet he had found something rare, a sense of companionship, understanding, and even friendship. As dawn approached, the first hints of pink and gold began to appear on the horizon. The cowboy looked at the woman beside the fire and felt a gratitude that was hard to express in words. He had expected a night of rest, perhaps a brief encounter with someone new, but he had received much more. He had been reminded of the value of sharing, listening, and opening oneself to the kindness of others. The Apache woman had offered him not just shelter, but understanding and perspective, a gift far greater than any food or fire could provide. Before he drifted into sleep, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would carry this night with him, not just as a memory, but as a lesson. Life on the road would continue to be hard, and solitude would return, but he had been reminded that connections, no matter how brief, could change a person. And in that moment, as the desert whispered around him and the fire burned low, he felt a rare peace settle over his heart. The night was no longer just a part of the journey. It had become a part of him, a story he would remember, a reminder that even in the harshest lands, kindness, courage, and understanding could be found. And as sleep finally claimed him, he held onto the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of the Apache woman, knowing that this night, simple yet profound, would remain with him for a lifetime. The desert morning was cool, with a light breeze carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. The cowboy awoke slowly, stretched, and looked around the small camp. The fire had burned low, leaving glowing embers, and the Apache woman was already awake, tending the remains of the night's warmth. She moved with careful precision, adding kindling to stoke a new flame. The sunlight had just begun to touch the horizon, casting a soft gold light over the landscape. The cowboy took a moment to appreciate the beauty around him, the way the morning touched the rocks, the distant hills, and the creek that had provided him with water just a night before. He felt a strange comfort in her presence, a sense of peace he had not known for a long time. Yet the day held its own realities, and he knew he could not remain in one place for too long. He had responsibilities, perhaps unseen or unspoken, that required him to continue his journey. Still, the thought of leaving so soon made him uneasy. He had experienced countless nights of loneliness, but the night spent here with the Apache woman had left a lasting impression. Before he could dwell too long, a sound interrupted the morning calm. In the distance, the faint but unmistakable sound of hooves against the dry desert ground reached their ears. The cowboy squinted toward the horizon, shading his eyes from the sun. A group of riders approached, kicking up dust that glinted in the morning light. There was no mistaking it. These were not townspeople or travelers. They were rough, armed men, their intent clear from the way they rode. The Apache woman's eyes narrowed slightly, her body tensing in readiness. She had encountered dangers before, and her instincts told her that these men were trouble. She moved to the cowboy's side, calm yet firm. "They are not friendly," she said softly. "We must be careful." The cowboy's heart quickened. Danger on the open range was nothing new to him. He had faced outlaws and wild animals alike, yet there was something different about this moment. Here it was not just about survival for himself. It was about protecting the camp, the woman who had shown him unexpected kindness, and the few belongings she had. He nodded, gripping his belt and instinctively feeling for the revolver he carried. The men rode closer, their faces partially hidden under wide-brimmed hats, and their intentions became clear. They were looking for supplies, for horses, and perhaps for trouble. The cowboy and the woman exchanged a glance, each understanding the other's thoughts without words. They needed a plan, and quickly. The Apache woman moved with a swift, practiced grace, gathering a few items and preparing to defend the camp. "We can't run," she said. "They would follow. We must be clever, and we must stand together." The cowboy respected her decisiveness. He had always relied on quick thinking in dangerous situations, but there was something in her confidence that made him trust her judgment. Together, they assessed the terrain, the rocks, the sparse trees, and the creek nearby. All could be used to their advantage. As the outlaws drew nearer, the cowboy felt the adrenaline rise. His mind raced through strategies, recalling lessons from countless encounters with bandits and wild animals. Yet, he was not alone this time. The Apache woman's presence beside him gave him courage, her calm focus grounding him. They moved silently, positioning themselves in a way that would give them a clear view of anyone approaching, yet also allow for a quick defense if necessary. The riders were now close enough to shout, their voices rough and commanding. "Hand over what you've got," one of them yelled, swinging a rifle in the air. The cowboy felt a twinge of fear, but it was tempered by determination. He had survived many challenges, and he would not falter now. The Apache woman stepped slightly forward, her stance firm, her eyes locked on the approaching men. "We have nothing to fight over," she said calmly, but the tone carried authority. The outlaws laughed, clearly underestimating her. They spurred their horses forward, thinking it would be an easy victory, but the cowboy and the woman were ready. They had studied the land, the approach, and each other's strengths. When the first rider lunged too close, the cowboy moved swiftly, positioning himself to block and defend, while the woman used the terrain to her advantage, guiding the others into positions where they could not easily advance. The confrontation was tense. Dust rose around them, and the sound of hooves, shouts, and the occasional crack of a weapon filled the air. The cowboy realized that survival was no longer just a personal matter. It was about teamwork, trust, and quick thinking. He followed her cues, anticipating movements, and together they created a small but effective defense. The outlaws, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, began to hesitate. They were not prepared for a fight where the defenders were so coordinated, alert, and determined. Amid the chaos, the cowboy felt a new respect for the Apache woman. She was not just brave, she was intelligent, resourceful, and calm under pressure. Every decision she made had purpose, every movement was precise. In that moment, he realized that strength came in many forms, not just from wielding a weapon, but from wisdom, understanding, and courage. He was learning, not just about survival in the desert, but about life itself, and about the kind of person he wanted to be. After what felt like hours, though it may have been only minutes, the outlaws finally retreated. They had underestimated their opponents and realized that this small camp was not an easy target. The cowboy and the woman stood together, catching their breath, listening to the fading sound of hooves in the distance. There was a moment of quiet, a pause in which the desert seemed to settle back into its peaceful rhythm. The danger had passed, but the adrenaline still lingered, leaving their hearts pounding and their minds alert. The cowboy turned to the Apache woman, feeling a mix of relief and admiration. "You handled that perfectly," he said, his voice steady but filled with awe. "I don't think I could have done it without you." She shook her head slightly, a modest smile touching her lips. "You did your part," she said. "We both did. That is how we survive, by understanding each other, by trusting each other." He nodded, realizing the truth in her words. This encounter, more than just a physical challenge, had strengthened their bond. They had faced danger together and emerged with a deeper respect for one another. It was a lesson the cowboy would carry with him long after the dust had settled and the desert returned to its quiet calm. As the sun climbed higher, warming the desert, they sat together by the fire, tending to small tasks and recovering from the night's events. The cowboy felt a new sense of gratitude, not just for the fire, the food, and the temporary shelter, but for the companionship and shared understanding that had grown between them. He had arrived at this camp expecting solitude, but he had found connection, courage, and a reminder of the importance of trust. The Apache woman, too, seemed to sense the change in him. She spoke softly about the land, about the importance of staying aware, and about the ways people could live in harmony even amidst challenges. Her words were practical, yet carried a quiet wisdom that resonated deeply with the cowboy. He listened intently, realizing that every moment in life offered a lesson, and that even danger could teach something valuable if approached with patience and awareness. By mid-morning, the adrenaline had faded, leaving only a sense of calm and reflection. The cowboy looked around the camp, appreciating the quiet strength of the woman beside him, the beauty of the desert, and the clarity that came from surviving a challenge together. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that life on the road could be difficult, but that meaningful connections could be found even in unexpected places. As they prepared for the day, the cowboy realized that this experience had changed him. He had come here as a traveler, cautious and solitary, and he would leave with a deeper understanding of trust, courage, and partnership. The desert, once vast and isolating, now felt alive with lessons and possibilities. And the woman beside him, who had once been a stranger, had become a teacher, a companion, and a friend whose wisdom he would carry with him far beyond this place. They worked together to restore the camp, gather water, and prepare for whatever the day might bring. The cowboy felt a quiet pride in their teamwork, a sense of accomplishment that went beyond mere survival. He realized that challenges, even dangerous ones, could strengthen bonds and teach lessons that no solitary journey could offer. As the sun reached its peak, the desert stretched out endlessly before them, bright and unforgiving. The cowboy and the Apache woman sat quietly for a moment, watching the land and reflecting on the night and morning they had shared. In the stillness, they found not just relief but understanding. They had faced danger together, relied on each other, and emerged stronger and wiser. For the cowboy, this part of the journey would remain etched in his memory. It was a reminder that courage and strength were not just measured by physical skill, but by wisdom, patience, and the willingness to trust and support one another. And as they prepared to continue their day, he felt a sense of readiness, not just for the challenges of the desert, but for the possibilities that lay ahead in the unknown roads of life. After the dust had settled and the echoes of danger had faded into the distance, the desert returned to its quiet rhythm. The morning sun shone brightly, turning the sand and rocks into a canvas of warm golds and reds. The cowboy and the Apache woman sat by the creek, letting the cool water run over their hands as they collected enough for the day. The events of the previous night had left both of them exhausted, yet there was a strange sense of calm in the air, a feeling that they had survived something together and had come out stronger for it. The cowboy watched the water ripple in his hands, thinking about the confrontation with the outlaws. He realized that he had been surprised by his own courage, by the way he had instinctively moved to protect the camp and stand beside the woman. And yet, he knew that he could not have done it alone. Her presence, her calm confidence, and her sharp understanding of the land had guided him and given him strength when he had needed it most. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he was part of something greater than himself, even if only for a fleeting moment. The Apache woman noticed his thoughtful expression and smiled softly. "You are learning," she said. "Not just about survival, but about yourself." Her words were gentle, but they carried weight. The cowboy looked at her, seeing the truth in her eyes. She was right. The danger had forced him to face not just external threats, but his own doubts, fears, and assumptions. He had been quick to judge, quick to rely on his own experience alone. Yet, standing together, they had learned that strength could come from partnership, from trust, and from understanding. He nodded slowly, letting the water drip from his hands back into the creek. "I've spent my life on the road thinking I had to face everything alone," he admitted. "But I see now that it doesn't have to be that way." She inclined her head, her expression calm but encouraging. "Even the strongest need someone to watch their back," she said. "No one survives the desert entirely alone. The land teaches us that if we are willing to listen." The cowboy smiled, feeling a sense of relief in admitting this truth. It was not easy for him to speak of vulnerability, but her presence made it possible. They had shared danger, they had relied on each other, and they had come through it not just unscathed, but with a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. The desert, once a place of endless challenge, now seemed like a teacher, showing them lessons of courage, trust, and connection. As the morning wore on, they sat together by the fire, tending to simple tasks like preparing food and repairing small items damaged during the confrontation. The cowboy observed the way she moved, noticing the grace and efficiency in her actions. Everything she did seemed intentional, purposeful, and full of respect for the land and its resources. He realized that her strength was not just in her ability to survive, but in the way she lived fully and mindfully, taking only what was needed and giving back through care and attention. "You are very skilled," he said, breaking a comfortable silence. "I've never met anyone who can handle everything so calmly and carefully." She smiled again, a quiet, knowing smile. "Experience teaches us," she replied. "We cannot control the world, but we can learn to move with it. That is the difference between surviving and truly living." The cowboy reflected on her words, realizing that he had spent much of his life merely surviving. He had faced storms, outlaws, and harsh terrain, but he had rarely allowed himself to experience life fully, to notice its small wonders, or to appreciate the quiet moments of connection. Sitting here, sharing this day with her, he understood that life could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful when one allowed trust, understanding, and companionship into it. They spent hours talking quietly, sharing stories from their lives. She spoke of her childhood among her people, the traditions that had shaped her, and the lessons she had learned from elders and ancestors. She described how her family had taught her the ways of the land, the plants that healed, the animals that guided, and the importance of listening to the wind and water. The cowboy listened intently, fascinated by her knowledge and perspective. Each story revealed not just survival skills, but a philosophy of life, one that valued patience, respect, and harmony with the world around them. In turn, he shared stories from his own life. Tales of long cattle drives, towns he had passed through, and the many nights spent alone under the stars. At first, his stories were cautious and measured, but her attentive presence encouraged him to open up more. He spoke of the loneliness, the hardships, and the fleeting moments of joy that had kept him going. Through these exchanges, he realized that he was not just telling stories. He was reflecting on his own life, gaining insight into who he was and what mattered to him. As the day went on, the conversation shifted to quieter reflections. They spoke of dreams and hopes, of fears and regrets, and of the ways life had shaped them. The cowboy realized that he had spent so much time looking outward, toward survival, toward work, toward the next challenge, that he had neglected to look inward. Her questions, gentle and thoughtful, encouraged him to consider not just what he had done, but who he wanted to be. The Apache woman shared her own reflections as well, speaking of the challenges she had faced, the moments of fear and doubt, and the ways she had learned to remain strong in the face of adversity. Her honesty was refreshing, and the cowboy felt a growing admiration for her courage, intelligence, and resilience. He understood that strength was not measured only by physical ability or skill, but by the willingness to face life fully, to acknowledge fears, and to move forward despite them. By late afternoon, the sun was beginning to lower again, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The cowboy and the Apache woman had built a quiet rhythm together, working, talking, and simply sharing the space around the fire. There was a sense of ease that had grown between them, a comfort in knowing that they could trust each other and that they had faced challenges together. The bond they had formed was subtle, yet profound, a connection forged through shared experience, understanding, and respect. As the evening approached, the cowboy found himself thinking about the journey ahead. He knew he would have to continue traveling, facing new challenges and uncertainties. Yet, for the first time in a long while, he felt prepared, not just physically but emotionally. The lessons he had learned from the Apache woman and the experiences they had shared had given him a new perspective on life, on trust, and on human connection. Sitting by the fire, he glanced at her and realized how much he had come to rely on her presence, not out of necessity, but out of admiration and respect. She had shown him that courage, wisdom, and kindness could coexist, and that even in the harshest environments, people could find ways to support and understand each other. He felt grateful for her guidance, for her patience, and for the quiet strength she had shared with him. The night fell, and stars began to appear one by one in the clear desert sky. The cowboy and the woman sat together, watching the constellations, letting the quiet of the night sink in. There were no words for a long while, just the crackle of the fire, the whisper of the wind, and the deep sense of understanding that had grown between them. It was a moment of reflection, of connection, and of gratitude. For the cowboy, this night was different from the one before. The previous night had been about survival, about trust in a moment of danger. This night was about understanding of himself, of another person, and of the world around him. He realized that life was not just about facing challenges, but about learning from them, about growing stronger through experience, and about valuing the connections that made the journey meaningful. As the fire burned low and the night grew colder, the cowboy pulled his coat tighter and settled closer to the warmth. The Apache woman handed him a blanket, which he accepted gratefully, and they sat quietly, side by side. There was comfort in the simple act, a shared understanding that did not need words. In that silence, he felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling that the world, despite its challenges, could be a place of learning, connection, and quiet joy. Before sleep claimed him, he reflected on the day. The danger they had faced, the conversations they had shared, and the lessons he had learned all seemed to merge into a single understanding. Life was richer when shared, when approached with respect, courage, and trust. He realized that the Apache woman had given him more than companionship. She had given him insight, perspective, and a reminder of the strength that comes from connection. And as he drifted off to sleep, he knew that the experiences of this day and night would stay with him, shaping the way he moved through the world, the way he trusted others, and the way he faced the challenges yet to come. The desert, vast and demanding, had offered not only danger and hardship, but also wisdom, understanding, and the rare gift of shared human experience. Morning came quietly over the desert, with the first rays of sunlight painting the rocks and sand in soft shades of gold and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the coolness of the creek that ran gently nearby. The cowboy stirred slowly, feeling the warmth of the blanket and the comforting presence of the Apache woman nearby. Last night and the previous day had left him both physically tired and emotionally full. He had learned more about courage, trust, and connection than he had in years of wandering the open land. He watched her move about the small camp, gathering water, tending the fire, and preparing a simple breakfast. Her movements were calm, steady, and graceful, each gesture purposeful and respectful of the land around them. The cowboy admired her silently, realizing how much he had come to rely on her guidance, her wisdom, and her presence. He had arrived here as a solitary traveler, expecting nothing but rest and water, and yet he had found a teacher, a companion, and a friend. When she noticed him watching, she smiled softly. "The day is young," she said. "We should prepare for the journey ahead, even if it is only for today." The cowboy nodded, feeling the weight of what she said. He knew that soon he would have to continue on his path, as all travelers must, but he also knew that he would carry the lessons of this place and this encounter with him wherever he went. They ate quietly, sharing simple food and letting the calm of the morning sink in. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, only the understanding that each moment was precious, each exchange meaningful. The cowboy reflected on the events of the past 2 days. The night spent by the fire, the danger they had faced together, and the deep conversations that had opened his eyes to new ways of thinking and being. He felt a sense of gratitude, not just for the survival and safety they had achieved, but for the human connection that had transformed his experience of the desert. Finally, as the sun climbed higher, he knew it was time to move on. The cowboy stood slowly, stretching and adjusting his coat and boots. He felt a pang of reluctance, a quiet sadness at the thought of leaving. The Apache woman approached, standing tall and steady. There was a calm dignity in her posture, a quiet confidence that matched the strength she had shown in every moment they had shared. "You must go," she said softly, though her eyes held a hint of warmth and understanding. "The road calls, as it always does. But remember what you have learned here. The desert, the night, and the people you meet, they all teach you something if you are willing to listen." He nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "I will never forget this place or you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You've taught me more than I ever expected to learn in a lifetime of travel." She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "And you have shown me that trust and courage are not bound by blood or land," she replied. "We have walked a small path together and it has made us both stronger. That is what matters." For a long moment, they stood silently, letting the wind move through their hair and the quiet of the desert settle around them. The cowboy felt the weight of countless miles traveled, the endless roads and trials he had faced, but he also felt a new lightness in his chest, a sense of understanding, connection, and hope that had not been there before. He realized that the desert, which had once felt so empty and isolating, was alive with lessons, and that people, even strangers, could become guides in the most unexpected ways. Finally, he swung his leg over his horse and adjusted the reins. The animal snorted softly, sensing the calm but alert energy of its rider. The cowboy looked back at the small camp, at the fire now burning low, at the woman who had changed his perspective in so many ways. He felt gratitude, respect, and a touch of sorrow at the parting, but also a quiet joy for having experienced this brief but meaningful connection. "I will see you again," he said, though he was unsure if he truly would. The Apache woman's eyes glimmered with a mix of certainty and mystery. "Perhaps," she said, "paths cross in strange ways. The desert has a way of bringing people together, even when it seems impossible." He nodded once more, then guided his horse to the trail that would take him forward. Each step he took felt deliberate, thoughtful. He was no longer the same solitary traveler who had stumbled upon the camp just days before. He carried with him the wisdom, courage, and understanding gained from their shared experiences. The desert seemed different now, not just a place of challenge, but a landscape rich with lessons, stories, and the possibility of connection. As he rode, the cowboy thought back on the conversations, the moments of silence, and the trust that had grown between them. He remembered the warmth of the fire, the way the night had seemed alive with stars, and the quiet power of someone who understood the land and the heart alike. He realized that life was not just about surviving or traveling from one place to another. It was about learning, growing, and appreciating the people who cross our paths, even for a brief time. The trail stretched out before him, winding through the hills and valleys of the desert. The cowboy felt a sense of readiness, a renewed determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He knew that the road would be long, filled with obstacles, loneliness, and uncertainty. But he also knew that he carried something invaluable with him. The understanding that courage and kindness, wisdom and trust could be found in unexpected places, and that the bonds formed in brief encounters could leave lasting impressions. Hours passed as he rode, the desert shifting and changing around him. The sun rose higher, painting the land in bright light, and the cowboy felt a sense of clarity. He was more aware of his surroundings, more attuned to the signs of life in the land, and more confident in his ability to navigate both the challenges and the quiet moments of the journey. He realized that this experience had prepared him not just for the physical trials of the road, but for the emotional and spiritual ones as well. As the day wore on, the cowboy found himself smiling quietly to himself, recalling small details, the gentle encouragement of the Apache woman, the way she had guided him through danger, the lessons shared by the fire, and the calm wisdom that had left a lasting mark on him. He knew that these memories would stay with him forever, shaping the way he moved through the world, the way he trusted others, and the way he faced challenges with courage and understanding. By evening, he reached a small rise overlooking the desert plain. He stopped for a moment, letting the wind brush against his face and taking in the view. The land stretched endlessly, golden and wild, and he felt both the solitude of the road and the connection to the lessons he had learned. He thought of the Apache woman, of the quiet camp, of the firelight and conversations, and of the shared strength that had carried them through danger. Though he would continue on his journey, the cowboy understood that he would carry more than just memories. He carried a part of the wisdom, courage, and perspective he had gained from this encounter. He had learned that life's most meaningful lessons often came from unexpected places, from moments of vulnerability, trust, and human connection. And he had learned that even brief encounters could leave lasting impressions, shaping not only the journey ahead, but the person he was becoming. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the desert, the cowboy rode on, feeling a sense of peace and purpose he had not known before. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but he was ready. He knew now that the world, even in its harshest and most challenging moments, held moments of beauty, understanding, and connection. He had been given a gift, not just of survival, but of perspective, trust, and the quiet strength that comes from sharing the journey with another soul. And though the Apache woman remained behind, tending her camp and watching the horizon, their paths had crossed in a way that would never be forgotten. The cowboy knew that somewhere in the vast desert, their stories were intertwined, and that the lessons learned, the courage shared, and the bond formed would remain with him for the rest of his life. As night fell once more over the desert, the cowboy rode onward, carrying the warmth of the fire, the wisdom of the Apache woman, and the quiet knowledge that even in a life spent on the road, moments of connection and understanding could transform everything. The stars began to shine above, and he rode with a steady heart, ready for whatever lay ahead, knowing that the desert, with all its challenges and beauty, had given him a gift that no journey alone could provide.